My name is Claire Hadley. I'm 34. And on my wedding day, I stood at the cake table and counted 4 empty chairs. One had my father's name on it. One had my mother's. One was my sister Brooke's. The last belonged to Steph, my best friend since the 10th grade. They were all 40 minutes away at Brooke's engagement party, the one my mom scheduled for the exact same afternoon. I lifted the knife. Daniel's hand warmed over mine and my phone buzzed against the table. My mom's text glowed up at me. "We need to talk now." Then the call started. By the time the cake was cut, I'd counted 36 missed calls. I didn't answer a single one. And what none of them knew was already sitting in a county filing cabinet signed 3 years before waiting. Welcome back to Dramatic Much Stories. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. A week before the wedding, I want you to understand who I was in my family because it explains everything. I'm a hospice nurse. I sit with people in the last rooms of their lives. And I've learned that families show you the truth at the edges. In my own family, I was the edge they never looked at. I was the one you called when the water heater died at midnight. When Dad's prescription got tangled at the pharmacy, when the property tax notice came and nobody wanted to open it. Brooke was the one you called to celebrate. That was just the weather in our house. And I'd stopped expecting it to change. I didn't complain. I want to be honest about that because my weakness isn't that I'm weak. It's that I take responsibility for everyone quietly and then I don't tell a soul I did it. I carry things alone and call it being strong. So when I planned my wedding, I kept the guest list small. Daniel asked me once why I wasn't inviting more of my own side. I told him the truth I only half believed then. If they want to come, they'll come. He squeezed my hand and let it go. I made my parents a real invitation, the kind with a ribbon, and drove it out to the farm myself instead of trusting the mail. I told myself that was love. Looking back, it was a test. And some part of me already knew the result. There was something I'd done 3 years earlier after my father's stroke that I hadn't thought about in a long time. I would think about it again very soon. But that week, all I wanted was for the people I loved to sit in those chairs. The farm sits 20 minutes outside town, a gravel road my grandfather cut by hand. I grew up on it. When I pulled in that afternoon, my mother, Carol, was on the porch with a binder and she didn't look up right away. "Claire," she said like she'd forgotten I was coming. I held out the invitation. She took it, set it on top of the binder, and kept talking about Brooke. "You won't believe it. Tyler's family wants to do something proper. Carol, his mother, says, this deserves a real celebration. It took me a second to realize she was quoting Tyler's mother, praising her own son's choice, and somehow that became the headline. My father, Roy, sat in the corner of the porch with a blanket over his knees. The stroke took the strength on his right side 3 years ago, and it took something else, too. Some willingness to meet my eyes. "Hi, Dad," I said. He nodded at the railing. I asked my mom if she'd gotten the date right, the wedding date, and she waved her hand. Of course. But she didn't write it in the binder. She wrote everything in that binder. I watched her not write it. And I felt the old familiar cold settle in my chest, the one that says, "You are not the headline here, and you never will be." I drove back to town, telling myself I was being dramatic. People forget to write things down. A mother doesn't skip her own daughter's wedding. That's not a thing that happens. I actually said that out loud to my empty car. Then I caught myself because in our house, I already knew it absolutely was. To understand the empty chairs, you have to go back 3 years to the worst spring of my life. My father had his stroke in March. While he was still in the hospital, a letter came from the bank. The farm note was 90 days past due, and the word foreclosure was printed in bold like it was proud of itself. My parents had been quietly drowning for 2 years and had told no one, least of all me. The number was $84,000 to bring it current, plus the legal fees stacking on top. I was 31. I had a bit more than $84,000 in a savings account I'd built one double shift at a time since nursing school. It was supposed to be my someday house. Instead, I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage and made a decision in about 4 minutes. I would save the farm. My grandfather built it. My father was lying upstairs, unable to lift his right hand. I couldn't watch them lose the one thing that had outlived everything else. But I didn't just hand over the money. That part matters, so remember it. Even at my lowest, sitting in a parking garage with my father dying 2 floors up, some careful part of me knew that in my family, a gift would be remembered the way water remembers a stone. It wouldn't. So, I did something my mother would later call cold. I did it the right way on paper with a lawyer, and I told no one I would. 3 years later, in a crowded farmhouse living room, every person who skipped my wedding would find out exactly what I'd signed. But that spring, all I felt was the weight of being the only one who showed up. Brooke's engagement came down like a holiday nobody had voted on. My mother called me at the hospital, which she never did, and I stepped into the supply closet thinking something was wrong. "Brooke's engaged," she said, and I could hear her smiling through the phone. "Tyler proposed at the lake. We're thinking of a little celebration." I said, "Congratulations." And I meant it. Brooke is my sister. I held her the day she came home from the hospital. But then my mother said the thing that I would carry into every room for the next 2 months. "You'll understand, Claire. A wedding's just a party. Family is about who you really show up for." I stood in that supply closet with the smell of antiseptic, and I didn't say anything for a moment. "What does that mean, Mom?" I asked. "Oh, you know what I mean?" she said, the way she always did when she meant exactly the cruel thing and wanted me to pretend she didn't. She wanted me to know my wedding was a party and Brooke was family. She wanted me to hear the ranking. I'd heard it my whole life, but never that clean. I told her I had to get back to a patient, which was true. And I hung up and stood there with my hand on a shelf of gauze. A man was dying in room 411 and his daughter hadn't visited in 8 days, and I'd watched her miss the window the night before. I thought, you don't get these afternoons back. You think you do? You think family is a thing that waits for you. Then I walked back out and held a stranger's hand while my own family planned a party to outrank my vows. Steph and I had been best friends for 19 years. She was supposed to be my maid of honor, and she'd said yes back in the spring, fast and warm, the way she said everything, so I didn't think twice when I called her about the final dress fitting. There was a pause on the line. I know Steph's pauses. This one had a door behind it. "About that," she said, "I might have a conflict that weekend." "A conflict?" I asked what kind. Keeping my voice light, she got vague, and stuff is never vague. She talked around it. Something about family obligations that weren't hers. A party she'd been kind of roped into. It took me longer than it should have to understand. "Steph," I said. "Whose party?" Another pause. Brooke reached out. She finally said she made it sound like a whole thing. "Your mom called, too." My mother had called my best friend and recruited her. That was the part that landed. Not that Steph was tempted by a better party, though she was. It was that my mother had gone down my list, person by person, and pulled them toward Brooke's afternoon like a tide. "It's the same day as my wedding, Steph," I said. Silence. She hadn't known. Or she'd let herself not know, which is its own kind of choice. "I didn't realize," she said, and we both heard how thin it sounded. I told her I had to go. I didn't cry about stuff. I'd saved my crying for things worth crying over. And I was starting to suspect she wasn't one of them. But I sat in my car in the parking lot of the bridal shop a long time doing the math on who would actually be in the room when I said I do. I found out about the date from a cousin of all people. Marie texted me a screenshot. No words, just a picture of a pretty cream invitation. "Please join us to celebrate the engagement of Brooke and Tyler." The date was my wedding date. The time was an hour before my ceremony. I called my mother, and I kept my voice as flat as I could make it. "Mom, Brooke's party is the same day as my wedding." "Is it?" she said, and I have spent a lot of nights since wondering whether she really thought I'd believe that. We just couldn't make the calendars work. "Honey, Tyler's family is only in town that weekend. You know how it is." I said I didn't actually know how it was. I said there were 51 other weekends in the year. She sighed. The long-suffering sigh of a woman being asked to do an unreasonable thing like attend her daughter's wedding. Then she said it. "We can't split the family 2 ways in one weekend, Claire. People have to choose, and it isn't fair to make them. It isn't fair to make them choose." As if I were the one forcing a choice by having the audacity to get married, as if she hadn't built the fork in the road herself and then blamed me for the traffic. I stood in my kitchen and felt something go very quiet and very clear inside me. I wasn't going to argue. Arguing was a thing you did when you still believed the other person might move. "Okay, Mom," I said. "I hope it's a beautiful party." She softened instantly. "The way bullies do when you stop bleeding." "You're being so mature about this," she said. I hung up before she could hear me laugh because if I laughed, I might not stop. That night, Daniel found me at the kitchen table with the seating chart, moving names around like I could conjure people out of cardstock. He sat down across from me and didn't say anything for a while. Daniel is good at that. Finally, he asked, "Do you want to move the date?" I'd thought about it. Of course I had. I could move my wedding, fold myself smaller, make sure not a single chair sat empty, and prove once again that I was the flexible one, the one who bends so the family doesn't break. I'd done it my whole life. I looked at him, and I felt the strangest thing. Not anger, relief. "No," I said, "if they want to come, they'll come. If they don't, that's their answer, and I'd rather hear it clearly." Daniel reached across and put his hand over mine. "Then we get married Saturday," he said. "And we have the best day of our lives, and we let them miss it." I want to tell you that decision felt powerful. It didn't. Not yet. It simply felt like I was putting down a weight that was keeping me down for so long. We pulled the 4 chairs from the chart, and then we put them back on purpose. "Leave them," I said. "Let the chairs say it." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That's a little dramatic for you." It was. I'm not a dramatic person, but some things deserve a witness, even an empty one. I went to bed that night lighter than I'd felt in months, and I didn't yet understand why. 3 days later, I'd find out when I finally opened a box I'd been carrying from apartment to apartment, unopened for 3 years. The box was a banker's box, the cardboard kind, and it had moved with me 3 times without ever being opened. I knew what was in it, more or less, paperwork from the worst spring of my life. I'd meant to file it properly someday and never had because opening it meant going back to the parking garage. But the night before my wedding, I couldn't sleep, and I found myself sitting on the floor of the spare room with the lid in my lap. On top was a manila envelope, soft at the corners. Across it, in my own handwriting from 3 years ago, one short label, "Farm Important." I almost didn't open it. I want you to understand how close I came to leaving it shut one more time. But my hands moved on their own, and I slid out the pages, and there it was. A promissory note, a recorded lien, and underneath in a smaller envelope I'd forgotten entirely, a letter in my grandfather's slanted handwriting, the year before he died. I read the first line of his letter and stopped breathing for a second. I didn't read the rest. Not then. I put it all back in the envelope and held it against my chest in the dark. And I understood that whatever happened at my wedding tomorrow, the real story was sitting in my lap. I just didn't know yet that everyone who skipped the wedding was about to learn it the hard way. Saturday came cold and cool, the kind of autumn day you'd order if they let you. We got married in a restored barn at a vineyard 15 minutes from town. String lights and hay bales and a borrowed quilt over the rail. I won't pretend the empty chairs didn't hurt. They did. During the vows, I looked out once and saw the 4 of them names on little cards fronting 4 folding chairs nobody sat in, and my throat closed for a moment. Then Daniel said my name, and I came back. We laughed during our vows. I cried during his. My friends from the hospital filled 2 whole rows. Nurses who'd traded shifts to be there. And the aunt I actually liked drove 3 hours. The room was full of people who chose me. That's the thing about empty chairs. They make the full ones impossible to ignore. We moved to the cake at sunset. It was a simple 2-tier lemon and elderflower, and Daniel put his hand over mine on the knife the way you're supposed to. That's when my phone, tucked into the sash at my waist, because I'd promised the photographer I'd keep it on me, started to buzz. I glanced down out of reflex. My mother's name, a text. "We need to talk now." 3 more words I didn't read yet, because the calls began stacking behind them one after another. My phone shivering against my hip like something alive. Brooke. Mom. Dad's landline. Mom again. I turned the ringer off, slid the knife down through lemon and elderflower, and kissed my husband. By the time we came up for air, the screen said 36 missed calls. I put the phone face down on the table. Whatever it was, it had waited this long. It could wait until the dancing was done. I didn't listen to the voicemails until almost midnight in the quiet of the hotel room, still in half my wedding makeup. Daniel sat beside me on the edge of the bed while I put the phone on speaker, and we listened to my family fall apart in real time. The first one was my mother at 4 in the afternoon, an hour into Brooke's party, her voice bright and brittle. "Claire, call me back the second you get this. It's important." The second, 20 minutes later, less bright. "Claire, honey, where are you? We really need you. Call me." By the fifth voicemail, her voice had changed entirely. It had the high, thin sound I've only heard in hospital hallways. The sound of a person watching a plan come apart in their hands. "Claire, you have to call me. You don't understand what's happening. Just call me." Then Brooke, somewhere in the middle, not bright at all, furious and wet. "I don't know what you did, but you ruined everything. Are you happy? Call Mom." I sat there in my wedding dress and felt the strangest cocktail of feelings. Worry, because some part of me is always the nurse, always braced to run toward the emergency. And under it, something I wasn't proud of and wasn't ashamed of either. Curiosity, because I had a fairly good idea what had happened at that party. I'd read enough of the envelope to guess. Whatever my parents had announced in front of Tyler's family, in front of all those guests, had collided with a piece of paper in a county office, and the sound it made had reached me through 36 phone calls. "You're not calling back tonight," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said, "tonight I'm dancing with my husband." But I'd call. I just wanted to know the whole story first. If you've ever been the one who holds everything together and still gets left off the guest list, you already know this exact feeling, the worry and the strange calm sitting side by side. Here's what I kept thinking that night. My whole life. When the phone rang like that, I ran. 3-6 calls, and the old me would have been in the car before the 10th, heart pounding, ready to fix whatever was broken, because being needed was the closest thing to being loved that I got. I knew that about myself. The nurse in me and the daughter in me had always been the same exhausted woman. But that night, for the first time, I didn't move. I let it ring. And the world didn't end. The farm didn't burn down. My father didn't die. The emergency that wasn't really my emergency just sat there blinking, waiting for me to make it mine. And I didn't. Daniel and I went back down to the barn and we danced until the string lights blurred. My aunt taught the youngest nurse a two-step. Someone spilled Prosecco on the borrowed quilt, and we laughed instead of panicking. And the whole time in the back of my mind, that envelope sat in the spare room of my apartment like a stone at the bottom of a clear lake. I could feel it there. I knew that come Monday, I would have to decide what kind of person I was going to be about it. The reliable daughter who smooths everything over, or the woman who finally lets the paper say what she'd never been allowed to say out loud. I pieced together what happened at the party over the next few days from Marie's texts and one long strange voicemail my father left that I'll get to later. Picture it. Brooke's engagement party. The backyard of the farm strung with rented lights. Tyler's parents in their good clothes. 60 guests with plastic flutes. Around 4 p.m. my mother stood up on the porch step and clinked her glass. She gave a speech about family, about legacy, about how some things are meant to be passed down. And then in front of everyone, she and my father announced their gift to the happy couple. They were giving Brooke and Tyler the farmhouse, the house, the land, my grandfather's land, as a wedding present, free and clear, to start their lives. The guests applauded. Tyler's mother teared up. Brooke cried the pretty kind of crying. And somewhere in that applause, Tyler's father, who I'm told is a careful man who reads things before he signs them, asked a careful man's question. He asked just to be sure whether the property was free and clear. And my mother, beaming, said, of course it was. It had been in the family for generations. Except it wasn't free and clear. Not even close. There was a lien on that property recorded in the county courthouse 3 years ago. And the name on it wasn't the bank's. It was mine. The daughter who wasn't at the party. The daughter whose wedding they'd all skipped to be there. And the moment someone pulled up the county records on a phone, which at a party full of curious people takes about 90 seconds, my mother's beautiful gift turned into a public documented problem with my signature at the bottom of it. Sunday morning, before I called anyone back, I sat at the kitchen table with Daniel and I opened the envelope all the way. I want to tell you exactly what was in it, because this is the thing I'd ask you to hold in your mind for the rest of this story. 3 documents. The first was a promissory note drawn up by a lawyer named Eileen Pratt 3 years ago stating that I, Claire Hadley, had loaned my parents, Roy and Carol Hadley, the sum of $84,000 to cure the default on the farm. Plus, I'd covered $11,000 more in fees for $95,000 total. It was signed by both my parents. I remembered the day they signed it. My father was still in the rehab facility. My mother was frantic. And I'd said gently, it's just a formality, so the family's protected. They signed without really reading because in a crisis, people sign anything that promises to make the water stop rising. The second document was the lien recorded at the county courthouse, securing that loan against the property. In plain words, it meant the farm could not be sold, gifted, or transferred to anyone without settling my loan first. The house was collateral, my collateral. The third was the letter from my grandfather, and I made myself read all of it that morning. He'd written it the year before he passed, and he wrote about the land like it was a person. Near the end, one line that I had to read twice. Land doesn't go to the one who's loved most. It stays with the one who keeps it alive. He'd underlined keeps it alive. I sat there and the paper didn't care who my mother loved more. It didn't care about parties or empty chairs or who got to be the headline. It only cared whose name was on the lien. And the name on the lien was mine. Daniel, who builds things for a living and respects a load-bearing wall, understood it before I finished explaining. So they tried to give away a house, he said slowly. That's already promised to you. Pledged. I said collateral. They can't transfer clear title to Brooke without paying me back first. $95,000 plus 3 years of simple interest the note specifies. He let out a low whistle. Do they know? That was the question, wasn't it? Did my parents understand when they stood on that porch step and played the generous king and queen that the thing they were giving away wasn't theirs to give cleanly? I thought about it honestly. My mother had signed the note in a panic and then spent 3 years pretending the whole crisis never happened. The way she pretended everything inconvenient never happened. I think she'd genuinely forgotten the shape of what she signed. I think she remembered that I helped somehow in some vague, self-erasing way that didn't require her to feel indebted, and she'd filed it under things daughters do and never looked again. So no, I don't think she knew. I think she stood up at that party absolutely certain the farm was hers to bestow, and the certainty is what makes it almost unbearable, because she wasn't lying to Tyler's father. She believed it. She'd loved Brooke so loudly for so long that she'd written my entire sacrifice out of the family story, and the county courthouse, which keeps better records than my mother's heart, had written it right back in. What are you going to do? Daniel asked. I looked at the 3 documents fanned across our kitchen table on the first morning of our marriage. I'm going to make sure the paper still says what it says, I told him. And then I'm going to let them tell me the rest. I need to back up and tell you why I did it the careful way. Because if I don't, you'll think I'm someone who plans revenge 3 years in advance, and I'm not. Here's what really happened. 3 years ago, while my father was still in rehab, I overheard my mother on the phone with her sister. She didn't know I was in the next room. She was talking about the farm, about how once Roy was back on his feet, they might refinance it, pull some money out because Brooke's going to need help someday with a wedding, a house. You know how she is. She can't do it on her own like Claire can. Pull money out of the farm. The farm I was about to spend my entire savings to save for Brooks someday. I stood in that hallway and felt the floor tilt. I just decided to give them everything I had, and my mother was already planning how to leverage it for the daughter she actually worried about. So the next day I called a lawyer not to trap anyone, to protect the farm, and honestly to protect myself, because I finally understood that a promise in my family was written in disappearing ink. I told Eileen Pratt I wanted to help my parents, but I needed it documented, properly recorded, so the land couldn't be quietly borrowed against or signed away without the debt being honored. She said it was the smartest thing a person in my position could do. I felt guilty doing it. I felt like a bad daughter, calculating, cold. I almost didn't record the lien, but I did. And for 3 years, I felt slightly ashamed of it, like I'd accused my family of something. Turns out, I hadn't accused them of anything they didn't eventually do in front of 60 people on my wedding day. By Sunday afternoon, the texts had a new flavor. The pleading was gone. The blaming had arrived. Brooke led the charge. "You ruined my engagement party. Tyler's parents think we're frauds. Call Mom right now." Then my mother. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family?" I read them at the kitchen table and I noticed something almost funny. Not one of them asked how my wedding was. Not one of them said congratulations. They'd skipped the entire event. And now the only acknowledgement that it had happened at all was the accusation that I'd somehow sabotaged their party from inside mine. The story had already rewritten itself in their heads. I was the villain. I'd done something. The fact that I'd been standing at a cake table 15 minutes away, that I hadn't lifted a finger, that the only thing I'd done was exist as a creditor 3 years ago. None of that mattered. My mother's old line came back to me, the one from the supply closet. "A wedding's just a party. Family's about who you really show up for." I almost texted it back to her. I didn't. But I sat with it, turning it over because it had curdled into something she'd never intended. She was right. In the end, family is about who shows up. 3 years ago, when the farm was 90 days from the auction block, exactly one person had shown up with everything she had, and that person hadn't been invited to the celebration of the thing she'd saved. I put the phone down without answering any of them. I had one stop to make first, and it wasn't the farm. It was a small brick building downtown where a man named Walter Bell kept much better track of my family's promises than my family ever had. Walter Bell had been the loan officer on the farm note for 15 years, and he'd handled the lien paperwork when Eileen recorded it. I made an appointment for Monday morning, not to plot anything, but because before this went any further, I needed to be certain the ground under me was solid. I've learned in nursing that you check the chart before you act. You don't run on what you assume. Walter is a careful, kind man in his 60s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He remembered me. He pulled the file while I sat across his desk. "It's all in order," he said, sliding the recorded lien toward me. "Filed correctly 3 years ago, properly secured against the parcel." He looked at me over the glasses. "Claire, I'll be honest. I got 2 calls this weekend. Your mother and a gentleman, Tyler's father, I gather, asking me to explain the encumbrance on the property." My stomach tightened. "What did you tell them?" "The truth," Walter said simply. "That the property has a recorded lien held by you, that it can't transfer clean until the debt's satisfied, and that it's all public record any title company would find in an afternoon." He took off his glasses. I didn't editorialize. I don't have to. The record speaks. I asked him carefully whether my parents could do anything to undo it without me. He shook his head. "Not without your signature releasing it. The lien is yours to release or enforce." I drove away from that little brick building knowing exactly where I stood, which is a rare and steadying feeling. I wasn't going to ambush anyone. I wasn't going to enforce anything cruel, but I also wasn't going to sign away the one piece of paper in my entire life that said in plain language that I had mattered. My mother changed tactics on Tuesday. The anger hadn't worked, so she reached for the older tool, the one that had run our family for 30 years. Guilt, she called. And this time, her voice was soft and wounded. The voice of a woman who has only ever wanted the best for everyone. "Claire, honey," she said, "I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding, and I think we can fix it as a family." I said, "I am listening. When you helped us with the farm, that was such a gift, such a loving thing. And I know you never meant it to be, a legal thing hanging over us. That's not who you are." She let that sit. "So, I think the kindest thing, the thing that would really show everyone you're not bitter about the party would be to just sign the release. Let us give Brooke her start. After everything we did for you, you'd do this to your sister." There it was. After everything we did for you, I sat with the phone and I let myself actually inventory everything they did for me because she'd invited me to. They raised me. Yes. And they also taught me every single day that my role was to provide and Brooke's role was to receive. That my love was infrastructure and Brooke's was the headline. That a wedding was just a party. "Mom," I said very calmly, "I'm not bitter about the party." That was true. "But I'm not signing away $95,000 so you can give Brooke a house I paid to keep." There was a sharp intake of breath. "So, this is about money," she said. the disappointment thick enough to spread on bread. "No, Mom," I said. "It was never about money. You're the one who made it about a house." And I gently ended the call. Brooke showed up at my apartment Wednesday night, which she had never once done in the 3 years I'd lived there. She didn't know which buzzer was mine. That detail told its own story. When I let her in, she was somewhere between fury and panic and underneath both. Something I hadn't expected. Fear. "Tyler's freaking out," she said before she even sat down. "His parents think we lied to them. His dad keeps asking about the lien, about why there's a lien. And Tyler keeps looking at me like I knew." "Did you know?" I asked. "Of course I didn't know," she snapped. "Nobody tells me anything. Mom just said the house was ours to give." She paced my small living room. "Why do you even have a lien on the farm? Who does that to their own family?" And here's where I could have been cruel. I had every line loaded. Instead, I told her the truth plainly. The way you tell someone news they should have had years ago. "Brooke, 3 years ago, the bank was going to take the farm. Dad was in the hospital. I emptied my savings, $95,000 to save it. I did it on paper so it couldn't be borrowed against or given away without being paid back. That's what a lien is." She stopped pacing. I watched the number land on her. $95,000. Watched her try to fit it against the version of me she'd carried her whole life. The reliable one. The one who doesn't need things. "You never said anything," she said, quieter. "No," I agreed. "I didn't." She sat down then on the edge of my couch, and for the first time in years, my sister looked at me like a person instead of an appliance. "Tyler's going to want to slow everything down," she said. "Yeah," I said. "He probably is." My father called me Thursday on the landline, which is how I knew it was really him and not my mother dialing for him. His speech still slurs a little since the stroke, and it takes effort for him to talk. So when Roy calls, he means it. "Claire," he said. "It's your dad." As if I wouldn't know. We sat in silence on the line for a moment. Then he said the most honest thing he'd said to me in 3 years. "I knew about the lien. I waited. I signed it. I remembered. Your mother forgot or made herself forget, but I didn't." His voice cracked. "I let her stand up at that party and give away your house. I knew, and I let her because it was easier than telling her the truth in front of everyone. I've been a coward since the stroke, Claire. Maybe before." I felt my eyes sting. This was the apology I'd wanted for 3 years, and it had arrived. And it was real. "Why, Dad?" I asked. He was quiet. "Because every time I look at you, I see the girl who saved us, and I'm ashamed I needed saving. It is easier to look at Brooke. She never saw me weak. There it was. The whole sad architecture of it, not malice, shame, wearing the mask of favoritism." I sat with that, and then he said the thing that reminded me he was still, even now, my mother's husband. "So, I'm asking you as your father, sign the release. Let us fix this. Let me have peace before I go." And I loved him, and I ached for him. And I said, "Dad, I'd give you anything, but I won't give you that. Not so it can be handed to Brooke. If you want peace, we make this fair in the open." He sighed, and I heard my mother's voice somewhere behind him. And the call ended soon after. The summons came Friday, formal as a court date. My mother wanted a family meeting Sunday afternoon at the farmhouse to settle this like adults together. She made a point of telling me who'd be there. Aunts, uncles, my cousin Marie, and she added almost casually, Tyler's parents. So they can see we're a normal, loving family. I understood the move immediately. She wanted an audience. She wanted to sit me in a crowded room, surround me with relatives, frame me as the bitter daughter holding the family hostage, and apply enough collective pressure that I'd sign the release just to make the discomfort stop. It's an old trick, and it works, because most people will trade almost anything for the room to stop staring at them. She'd used it on me my whole life. The difference was that this time I was going to bring my own paperwork to the performance. "I'll be there," I told her. And I could hear her surprise that I'd agreed so easily. She'd expected me to resist, so she could call me difficult. Instead, I said yes, and that unsettled her more than a no would have. I spent Saturday making copies. The promissory note, the recorded lien, my grandfather's letter, though that one I'd only read aloud if the moment asked for it. I put them in a plain manila envelope, the same kind that had held them for 3 years. Daniel offered to come. I told him this was mine to walk into alone, and he understood the way he always does. Sunday morning, I drove out to the farm down my grandfather's gravel road, the envelope on the passenger seat where a maid of honor should have sat a week before. I wasn't nervous. That surprised me. I think I'd been getting ready for this room my entire life. The farmhouse living room was full when I walked in, and they'd arranged it like a tribunal without admitting that's what it was. My mother sat in the center of the couch, my father beside her, smaller than I remembered. Brooke perched on the arm. Tyler stood by the window with his arms crossed, and his parents sat stiffly in the two good chairs, the careful father watching everything. Aunts and uncles ringed the room. Marie gave me a small nervous nod. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked into the silence, and somebody's teacup clinked against its saucer. I stood just inside the doorway with my envelope and said, "Hello," calmly to everyone. My mother began before I'd even sat down, which told me she'd rehearsed. "Claire, we're so glad you came. We wanted everyone here because family problems should be solved by family." She turned to the room, her voice warming into performance. "I'll be honest with all of you because I think honesty is best. My daughter is holding a legal claim over our family home, a claim she put there secretly, and she's refusing to release it so her sister can have a wedding gift. I don't know where the daughter I raised went." She dabbed at her eye. "We gave Claire everything. And this is what she does." The room shifted toward me, all those faces rearranging into disappointment, exactly as she'd designed. An uncle muttered something about family loyalty. Tyler's father said nothing, but he was watching me, not my mother. And I noted that the pressure in the room was a physical thing, a weight pressing on my sternum. The old familiar weight that said, "Be smaller. Be easier. Sign the thing. Make them stop looking." I felt my whole childhood pulling at me to fold. And then I felt the envelope in my hand, and I remembered that I was no longer a child in this house. I was the woman who'd kept it standing. I stayed exactly where I was, and I let the silence stretch one more tick of the clock. "You're right, Mom," I said. "Honesty is best, so let me be honest, too." I walked to the coffee table in the middle of the room, and I set my envelope down, unhurried. 3 years ago this spring, the bank sent a foreclosure notice on this farm. The note was 90 days past due. The amount to bring it current with fees was $95,000. The room went still in a different way now. Dad was in the hospital. Mom, you were beside yourself. And I was 31 years old with exactly $84,000 in savings. Every dollar I'd earned working double shifts since nursing school. I slid the first page out. I gave it all, plus $11,000 more I borrowed to save this house. Not as a loan I shouted about, but as a quiet thing on paper so that the farm could never be taken or given away without the debt being honored. I laid the promissory note on the table, my parents' signatures plain at the bottom. "Both of you signed this. You may have forgotten. The county didn't." I set the recorded lien beside it. My mother had gone white. "Claire," she started, but I kept my voice level and low, and somehow that quiet made the room lean in. "I'm not taking the house," I said. "I never wanted the house. I'm just the reason there's still a house to give." I looked at Tyler's father, the careful man, and I spoke to him directly. "You asked Walter Bell about the lien. He told you the truth. It's real. It's mine, and it's public record. I didn't hide it from you. I hid it from no one. My own family simply chose not to remember it." That's when my mother exploded. She came up off the couch, her wounded softness gone, her voice tearing through the room. "How dare you? How dare you humiliate us in our own home in front of everyone after we raised you, after everything we sacrificed?" She was shaking. "You ungrateful, calculating girl. You did this to punish your sister." The aunts stared. Marie put a hand over her mouth. And I stood in the middle of that storm and felt for the first time in my life completely calm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I'm not punishing anyone, Mom," I said. "I'm just done pretending the paper doesn't say what it says." Tyler's father stood up quietly and asked Tyler to step outside with him. Brooke watched them go and her face came apart. For a moment, nobody spoke. The grandfather clock ticked. Then my cousin Marie of all people said softly into the silence, She's the one who really showed up. It landed like a struck bell. My mother's own words, the ones she'd used to rank a party over a wedding, turned all the way around and pointed home. 3 years ago, when the farm was 90 days from the auction block, exactly one person had shown up. And it wasn't the daughter they threw the party for. An uncle who'd muttered about loyalty a minute earlier was now looking at my mother differently, and so were the others. The room reorganizing itself in real time as the actual facts replaced the performance. My mother felt it turning. She always could read a room, even as she lost it. "After everything we did for you," she said again, but weaker now, reaching for the line that had always worked. And this time, I picked it up and handed it back. "After everything I did for this family," I said, yes, I'd protected it from being given away in a speech I wasn't invited to hear. Through the window, we could see Tyler and his father in the yard. Tyler's shoulders up around his ears. Brooke sat very still on the arm of the couch, and when she spoke, her voice was small. Why didn't anyone tell me she did that? Nobody answered, because the answer was the whole shape of our family, and everyone in that room had helped build it. My father reached over and took my mother's hand, not to comfort her exactly, but to stop her. And for once, she let herself be stopped. I picked my grandfather's letter up off the table, the one I hadn't read aloud, and held it a moment. Then I put it back in the envelope. Some things you keep for yourself. The room had heard enough truth for one afternoon. I didn't want to leave that room like a victor standing over the defeated. That's not what any of this was for. So before I left, I set down something better than a weapon. I set down a way forward. "Here's what I'll do," I said to the whole room, but really to my parents. "I'm not releasing the lien for free, and I'm not letting the farm be gifted to anyone over a debt I'm still owed. But I don't want to take the house, and I don't want to be paid back in a check none of you have. So, we get the farm appraised by someone independent. We put everything on the table, what it's worth, what I am owed, what's fair. If Brooke and Tyler want a future here, there's an honest way to build it with everyone's name on the paper this time in the open." I looked at my mother. No more speeches, no more surprises, just the truth written down where it can't be forgotten. It wasn't a punishment. It was the opposite. It was the fairness our family had never once managed on its own. My mother didn't thank me. I didn't expect her to. But my father met my eyes and nodded slow and certain. And I think that nod cost him more and meant more than anything he'd said on the phone. I picked up my envelope. I said goodbye to the aunts and to Marie. And I walked out through the kitchen where I'd done my homework as a girl, out the screen door that still stuck the same way it had for 30 years. I got in my car, and for the first time in my life in that house, I was the one driving away while they stayed behind to sit with what they'd done. The gravel crunched under my tires, and I rolled the windows down and I breathed. Here's how it settled. In the weeks after, Brooke and Tyler postponed the wedding. His parents, the careful kind, wanted to slow down and understand the family they were marrying into. And honestly, I don't blame them. Brooke was furious about that for a while, and she blamed me for a while. And then one day she didn't anymore. She called me, not in a panic, just to talk, and asked if I'd really worked doubles for years to build that savings account. I said yes. She was quiet. And then she said, "I'm sorry I never knew you." Not, "I'm sorry I skipped your wedding." Something bigger than that. We're not close, my sister and I. Maybe we never will be, but we're honest now, which is more than we ever were. The farm got appraised by an independent firm. We sat down, all of us, with Eileen Pratt and Walter Bell at the table, and we put the real numbers in the real light. My parents agreed to refinance properly, pay back what I was owed with interest, and put the future of the farm in writing where every child's name was visible. Brooke's start, if she still wants it, will be built on paper anyone can read, not on a gift that erased her sister. My mother and I talk less now, and what we say is smaller and truer. She has never once apologized. Not really, and I've made my peace with the fact that she may never understand what she did. Some people can't afford the mirror, but she did stop calling me only when something was broken. That's not nothing. My father comes by the apartment now every couple of weeks. He sits at our kitchen table and Daniel makes him coffee, and he tells the same stories about my grandfather, and I let him because I finally understand that his coldness was never about loving me less. It was about not being able to forgive himself for needing me. Steph texted an apology a month later, long and careful. I read it twice. I haven't written back yet. Maybe I will. But I've learned you can love someone for 19 years and still notice the day they showed you where you rank. As for me, I'm a married woman now. I kept the photographs from the wedding, including the one of the 4 empty chairs, and I don't find it sad anymore. I find it clarifying. Those chairs told me the truth. My whole family had spent 30 years talking around, and the cake was lemon and elderflower, and it was delicious, and the room was full of people who chose me. I think about that more than I think about who didn't come. The reliable daughter spent her whole life believing that if she just carried enough, she'd finally be the headline. She was wrong. She didn't need to be the headline. She needed to put the suitcase down. Being the one who holds everything together doesn't mean you owe everyone your silence. And it never meant you owed them the right to forget what you carried. Nobody came to my wedding. The empty chairs, the 36 missed calls, the paper they forgot they'd signed. If your family only calls when they need something, you're allowed to stop answering. And you are allowed to let the truth speak louder than the apology you'll never get. Share this with someone who's always been the reliable one.